Friends, have you ever wondered who the first person to live in the Haunted Mansion was? Well, I have. Brickey here. Today we're looking at the clues of Ken Anderson to try to determine who were the original owners that lived inside of Walt's Haunted Mansion, and share with you the story of Captain Gore, the first resident of Walt Disney's Haunted Mansion. After the World's Fair had concluded, Walt Disney had a pretty good idea that he wanted to do something New Orleans related with the old mansion that they had built on the riverside. Because keep in mind, the mansion had already been here for years, and they still didn't have an idea of what they were doing with it. Ken Anderson and a bunch of his wed buds head out to New Orleans because Walt was pretty sure New Orleans was going to be the theme for the mansion. And the assignment they were given, go to New Orleans and try to learn all the locals' ghost stories, legends, try to find something authentically that we can bring back home to Disneyland to theme our haunted house after. You see, they had to figure out who would live in Walt's Riverside Mansion. And what would their story be? Why would they have ended up there? Because after all, the mansion had sit here for years, but Walt, like many creatives, was torn in which direction to go. Before you finalize a concept, everything's a possibility and everything's tempting. It's something that creatives refer to as analysis paralysis, where because you have so many decisions to make, you simply can't decide upon one. So Ken Anderson and a group of Walt Disney Imagineers were tasked to go to New Orleans to try to figure out what the local stories were, what the local legends were, what the local ghost tales were, so that they could bring one of those stories back home to Disneyland and transplant it to the Haunted Mansion. So friends, in today's video, we're gonna look at who was the first person to ever live in Walt Disney's Haunted Mansion and share with you the lore of Captain Gore. So even though it wouldn't stay this way forever, for a while, Imagineer Ken Anderson was in charge of creating the backstory for the Haunted Mansion. He wouldn't be the Imagineering team that would finish it, but he was where it started. And some of the original pieces and storylines that he crafted are still a part of the mansion over 50 years later. Off of the side of New Orleans Square, not too far away from pirates, Walt wanted to build a house for a famous pirate, Bartholomew Roberts, AKA Black Bart. And he wanted it to be a home that had a legend or rumor that it was haunted by the wickedness of its owner. However, Ken Anderson thought Bartholomew Roberts just was too plain of a name, so he came up with the idea of Bartholomew Gore, AKA Captain Gore, who, as legend would have it, would be the cruelest, meanest pirate to ever sail through the Spanish Main. And this would begin the relationship between the Haunted Mansion and Pirates of the Caribbean, because after all, it would be a pirate, Captain Gore, that would be the resident of Walt's Haunted Mansion. And this won't be the only connection that the Haunted Mansion shares with Pirates of the Caribbean. But we'll get to that later on in today's video, because it might be the best part of today's video. So let's look at Ken Anderson's best version of the story of who Captain Gore was and discover who the first resident of the Haunted Mansion was and how did he end up here. Well, according to Ken Anderson's legend, like many of us, Captain Gore dreamt of retiring, and he wanted to retire to this quiet seaside community where he could maybe escape from being a fearsome pirate and just live out the rest of his years as a regular guy. So after he decided that the pirate life was no longer for him, he changed his name, moved to the seaside community, and created a new identity. And he funded it all with the blood money that he had made as a pirate. And he turned himself into a respectful citizen and seemed like a prosperous man with all of his wealth that he had earned doing pirate things. So purchasing a house and having it built perfectly positioned on the river's edge with a sailing ship as a weather vane and a spyglass on the balcony and an attic full of all kinds of treasures. There are still a lot of details from Captain Gore being the first ever resident of the Haunted Mansion. And the more you look, the more you'll find Gore's legend everywhere inside of the mansion. But part of Gore going normal was he wanted to bring on a bride. a young bride so she could bear him lots of children and he could live out the rest of his life, not like a pirate, but like a normal man. So in an attempt to make his life feel more complete, he took on a young bride to bear him children, a bride by the name of Priscilla. And he would share with her his wealth, his beautiful mansion, all based on one small agreement: never, ever step into his attic. The only part of the mansion that was off limits was the attic. She was never, ever to step into the attic. And what I love about this is that even at the very beginning of crafting a backstory for the Haunted Mansion, a bride was already part of the tale. But of course, the bride, on her wedding day, in her wedding dress, was way too curious, and she went into the attic. And in the attic, she opened up a chest. And inside of that locked, forbidden chest, she found all of Captain Gore's secrets, learned that he was a bloodthirsty pirate. In a rage, once Gore had realized that she had betrayed him and went into the one place in the mansion that she wasn't allowed to go, he lost his mind. And then she lost her life, and he threw her out the window. So when we go through the attic scene, we are falling out of the attic, just like how Captain Gore threw Priscilla, his bride, out the window. So Captain Gore threw his wife out of the attic, out of the window. But don't worry, she got revenge on him and haunted him until he lost his mind. Until he eventually would hang himself. So when the attraction begins, the man hanging from the rafters is Captain Gore, the original resident of the Haunted Mansion, the first story ever written about the Haunted Mansion, which is exactly what we see when we come in to the stretching room. So the ride begins just like the story and the lore began, with Captain Gore hanging up in the rafters. And the reason why we hear that woman scream, even though it's a man that's hanging, that's Priscilla, laughing and shrieking, knowing that she finally got revenge on the man that killed her, the man that threw her out of the window of the Haunted Mansion. I absolutely love this legend, love this story, and love that there's so many little reminiscent pieces of this original story that you can find all around the mansion. And I promised you there would be more Pirates of the Caribbean discoverable inside of the Haunted Mansion. When Mark Davis was creating character sketches for Pirates, he based the auctioneer off of the idea of Captain Gore. So when you go into Pirates and you see the auctioneer, that is what Captain Gore was supposed to look like. Is it Captain Gore? I don't know. That's up to you to decide. But also, when you go through the ballroom scene in the Haunted Mansion, that same animatronic comes out through the graveyard and is chased by a bride. So the fact that that character is in both here and in the Haunted Mansion, to me means that Captain Gore truly was the original resident of the Haunted Mansion. And even though there's lots of other stories that are told in there, just like your home, many families have probably lived there. Many families have probably lived their stories inside of there. And I love that the Haunted Mansion, like most homes, has generations of storytelling, and in this case, generations of spirits that are haunting it. I just love it. I love that Captain Gore is in here and also technically back in the mansion, being chased by Priscilla, his bride. And even though that's not the official story they went with, the fact that all those little pieces and clues are hidden in there, it makes me excited that the mansion, like so many things in Disneyland, the more you look around, the more you try to discover, the more you'll find. I love it. So I love the idea that the auctioneer being the only part of Pirates of the Caribbean that Walt Disney ever got to see and approve, and then that same mold or that same character showing up inside of the Haunted Mansion, it puts a little piece of Walt in there. Even though he wouldn't live to see the Haunted Mansion be built or finished, he did live long enough to approve that one character that happens to be the only character, one of the only characters, that's replicated in both Pirates and the Haunted Mansion. And because Pirates and Mansion were Walt's final 2 attractions, getting just a little bit of him inside of the mansion, I absolutely love that detail. So my question for you is this: having the auctioneer also be the same mold or same character that we see in the ballroom scene, does that make him the same person? Do you buy that the story continues over and that Captain Gore is actually in both attractions? So the question is, does that make those characters part of the mansion? Or is it just a nod to the original ideas that Ken Anderson and Walt Disney Imagineering had? There's no wrong answer here, but I would love to know your answer. I want to believe that Captain Gore and Priscilla were the original people that lived in the Haunted Mansion. I want to believe that the mansion has had so many different families that have created their own stories inside of the Haunted Mansion. That's what I want to believe. Would love to know what you believe, because there are no wrong answers. But it is kind of a coincidence, right? That there's so much nautical stuff in there and that same character shows up in both of them. So there's a lot going for maybe it is. Friends, from the edge of the Main Street train station at the end of another magical day at Disneyland, thank you so much for watching today's video. If you want to see the chapter before this one, go back and watch the video that I did where I show you 3 lessons that were learned at the World's Fair that were applied to the Haunted Mansion. Thank you so much for showing up. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed today's video, because there are so many more Haunted Mansion stories for me to tell you, and I cannot wait to share them. Friends, thank you so much for showing up. Thank you even more for subscribing to the channel, and thank you for loving the Haunted Mansion just like I do. Until the next time I see you falling out of the windows of the Haunted Mansion, I'll see you back here with more tales from the Haunted Mansion.